YouTube. Thanks for being here. We also want to take a moment to thank Astellas. They provided us with a grant to help support the men within the cancer community. So Astellas, thank you. And just as a brief introduction, my name is Dominique James. I work as a clinical associate here at the Cancer Wellness Center. I've been here for a little bit, and I lead the men's survivor support group, as well as the co-ed young adult survivor support group and a adult child caregivers group. And between that, I teach a writing class here at the center, and I also do counseling, individual couples and family.
And my name is Mark Lipschutz. I recently completed my graduate clinical internship here at the center, and now recently joined as staff. I'm also a clinical associate. I see individuals and couples for counseling, and then I'll be facilitating the significant other support group as well. So I'm glad to be here with you all today.
All right, let's get started. So we wanted to take this moment because we know that a lot of men are not as active within the mental health community, and yet the needs are still there. So we wanted to ensure that we were doing something here at the Cancer Wellness Center to ensure that this population gets the attention that it deserves and may need. And so these tips, this advice, this information is all curated for men. Particularly men with cancer, whether you're surviving or a survivor or you're in treatment. So yeah.
Yeah, so like Dominique said, so the research shows that somewhere between 40 to 60% of men experience mental distress during their diagnosis and treatment. So this range 40 to 60% depends study to study, and it also depends on the type of diagnosis. But we know it's quite a bit of men that experience mental distress. We'll talk about what the mental distress could look like later in this talk, but briefly, this could look like anxiety, depression, low confidence and self-esteem, and hopelessness as well. Men are less likely than women to seek treatment or get help when presented with stressful life events. And so there are a few reasons that we think that this might happen. And this is because of social norms about masculinity, which Dominique will talk about here in just a second. The downplaying of symptoms, which also ties in with perceptions about masculinity. And then general disconnection and isolation. But for specific, what causes the distress, the upheaval caused by the diagnosis. Dominique and I both see clients, and when we talk to men about this, they describe this as a rude awakening and their life being flipped upside down. So which understandably can cause a great amount of distress. Anxiety related to treatment decisions and treatment and medication side effects themselves can also contribute to this. And interestingly, also the prognosis concerns. So understandably, when you receive a certain prognosis, that could create a great amount of hopelessness or anxiety or other forms of mental distress as well. So these are just some reasons that we think this specific series on men is important, so that we could discuss the specific way that these considerations can present themselves within men.
All right, so masculinity, right? So we all sort of have a loose definition of what masculinity is. I think this has been shifting a lot recently, given advancements in gender dynamics and within the discussion of what it is, which I think can be confusing, but at the end of the day, it does lead to the definition around certain traits. And so these things include independence and self-reliance, vitality, virility, and this is really just sort of like what it means to embody strength, embody sort of your ability to procreate, all of these sort of things that are tied to what we've seen in so many James Bond films. Then, of course, physical strength, being able to open up that pickle jar, adaptability, seeing a situation and being able to respond quickly or at least moderately well within a reasonable timetable. And then also commanding and demanding the respect of peers and family members. And so with these traits, and as we look at masculinity, we sort of see how rigid these may be. They don't really allow for a lot of expansiveness. They're pretty inflexible. And so what we do know is now that we're having more discussions around masculinity, whether that's these new talks around toxic masculinity or being gentle, seeing and tapping into one's emotional side and having emotional depth and intelligence. These are starting to become expected, if not sort of demanded from the greater society. And so as we start to not dismantle necessarily, because I think that these things can spread to both genders and in between, we do want to sort of play into this a little bit for those of us who may cling to these because they may be a large part in our identity formation, large part of how we even sort of form a concept of self and really how we operate within the world. And so as we learned these things, often it's taught to us as early as childhood by our parents, by family members, those around us, whether those are peers, friends, what's taught at school. And then we also sort of see it within popular and social media. So this is films, this is on Instagram, Facebook, and so on. And then also our own expectations based on what we've sort of internalized. And so how can we rebuild these traits specifically after a diagnosis where some of these things such as physical strength, adaptability, and so on may be a little bit more scarce. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that in the next slide. But I think it's important for us to always sort of check in, sort of see what is mutable, what can be changed, and how do we sort of go about it. But first, it sort of takes a little bit of self-assessment and checking in and seeing, okay, what of these things and what of these things do I hold dear and can they be malleable? All right, next slide.
So as Dom mentioned, here you could see a mind map of different themes that were identified in the study that looked at body image, self-esteem, and sense of masculinity in patients with prostate cancer. While the study looked at prostate cancer patients specifically, the results very likely can be generalized to men with other cancers as well. I'll describe a couple of the themes that you can see here, but I'll leave this up as I talk about them, and feel free to look around and either follow along with a couple of examples that I'll be sharing, or feel free to look around the map and follow your own path as well. But you can just look around just to get an idea. So, for example, a lack of confidence can make someone feel shame or shameful, which is the emotion that makes us say, "I am a bad person," in one way or another. So, which in turn is interpreted as a threat to masculinity. So, another example is how an aging body forces a man to come to terms with his loss of youth, which can also be interpreted as a threat to his masculinity. Another example, lastly, you can also see how certain themes become evident when you're a cancer survivor as well, which is on the right hand of the mind map. For example, a greater sense of control can reaffirm one's sense of masculinity. This goes to show that there are many themes that touch on one another, but they can also be bidirectional. So ultimately, representing the subjective nature of these discussions. And so what's interesting here is the inverse can be true. So as you can see, that control, regaining a sense of control helps reaffirm masculinity. And you can take the opposite of that as well, where losing control becomes a threat to masculinity. And we'll talk about how all of these, the opposites of these different themes can either serve as supportive tools or can help conceptualize what you're experiencing during your diagnosis.
Okay, so as we talk about self-image, which is really how the reflection of what we put out into the world, but how we view ourselves internally based on whatever external traits we're demonstrating. The first thing we always want to look at, and when we are having challenges with it, is what's our level of positive self-regard. And so positive self-regard is generally referred to our self-esteem or how we sort of view ourselves. Are we feeling confident? Are we feeling good about ourselves? So it sort of ranges from high to low. And so as you sort of start to look at yourself and sort of view, how did you see yourself prior to the diagnosis? How do you see yourself now? And I think it's also important to see, where do you want to see yourself? And I'll sort of talk about that a little bit more later. But it's important to sort of look at this, and we can see it through what's known as the self-discrepancy theory. And so what this does is it breaks us up into three different self states, each of which is like a representation of how either we are viewed or how we see other people viewing us. And so with the actual self, this is the self state representation of attributes that we believe we actually possess. So I believe that I am a clinical associate. This is true. And it's something about me, right? So, and I also know that I'm 6'2", so on. These are pretty basic traits. But this is also the most grounded self, and can also deal with a lot of like insecurities. We may have sort of warped opinions of our actual self, and those can often be extraordinarily maladaptive, especially to our confidence. But once again, that'll lower our positive self-regard. Next is the ideal self state. So this is really the version of ourselves that we want to be, or that we believe others would like us to be, or traits or certain attributes that we expect of ourselves, or that we think or others expect of us, or that they may actually expect of us. So for me to assume that, you know, my ideal self has a six-pack and is able to bench press my car, that's probably not the most realistic. So with the ideal self, we always want to try and taper it down sometimes, because it can sort of lead to toxic representations of the self that aren't realistic for us. And so we're really only going to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot if we're not able to recognize what's realistic for us. Next is the ought, which is OUGHT, like I ought to be. And so this representation is really what people think we should possess. So this is really around, like, if I believe that I should be making seven figures by the time I'm 80 years old, then, and others believe this too, given maybe my past, or given maybe I've received some endowment or something like that. This is sort of an expectation that hasn't necessarily materialized much, very similar to the ideal version of self. But this ought can be quite dangerous. And depending on who's putting these expectations on us, if they're realistic, once again, especially as men, there's an expectation that we ought to be providers, we ought to be strong, self-sufficient, so on and so forth. But in many cases, this just isn't the truth, especially after a diagnosis where maybe you are having trouble maintaining an erection, or being able to feel as strong or virile as you once were, all of the sort of challenges that may come with survivorship. We may have to sort of adjust what this ought self needs to be. And we can sort of do this in conjunction with the ideal self, and sort of working towards a version of ourselves that's both realistic, but also grounded, and someone who we can be satisfied with. But more important than anything, we need to learn to accept our actual selves for where we are, what we're capable of, and sort of seeing, like, what do people expect from us, and is that realistic? And so as we're doing so, what we need to do is adjust our mindset. And so as we look at this, we always look at between the two forms, which are growth or fixed. A growth mindset occurs when we feel as though things can change and shift. There's some sense of liquidity or malleability, where I know that I can learn things, I will continue to learn things, and as I'm growing, I'm changing and shifting. While the fixed mindset is that I do things a certain way, it's always been a certain way, and it will continue to, because it has worked. And so already we can sort of see how this can harm us ultimately. knowing that flexibility, knowing that this growth mindset can really allow us to accept a lot of these new challenges that we may face and accept a future which may be even murky or just unknown. And so it's really about how can we sort of see what is to come and this variable of yet, right? And so as we're growing, as we're sort of starting to sort of see, establish whatever it is, this sort of self that we want to be represented as, we want to say we are a work in progress, we are constantly growing. I'm not necessarily there yet, but I am maybe putting in the work to be there, or maybe I just don't have the emotional capacity today, whatever it may be, but we're being realistic, we're being honest, and we're able to sort of look at that. And now when we engage with the world, we may find that there is some degree of performance or social anxiety, given that we're no longer the same self that we once were. And so in order to sort of deal with this, we always want to start to take note of where our unhealthy core beliefs may lie, whether that means that we've set expectations that just aren't realistic anymore. Maybe I was the breadwinner, but I was a writer and now my hands have neuropathy, so I'm not as productive. So maybe that means now I need to start looking at alternatives for how can I be productive? How can I still have this role? Or maybe sharing this role with others or receiving support. And so always want to sort of look at these challenges in social circles or just with ourselves and sort of recognizing where's this anxiety coming from and can we dismantle those thoughts or these attitudes, knowing that maybe it was something that was taught to us, or maybe it's something that a greater society that we live in believes, but we don't necessarily have to embody. Okay, next slide.
So as Dom talked about the self-image, I want to talk a bit about how self-image and body image touch on each other. So self-image, as Dom said, it's how you see yourself or your inner perception of in regards to broad categories. So this could be physically, mentally, interpersonally, spiritually. So think broad and general categories. Body image is how you see your external appearance. So I want to go through some examples of the impact of self-image and body image by posing questions for each area. So as I ask them, think to yourself how you would respond. Don't worry, we won't be asking you to share with the group today. So these are good questions to be asking yourself as you reflect on how self-image plays a role for you. So for physical appearance, how do you feel about your weight, your mobility? So perhaps you don't have the same mobility you had before your diagnosis. How do you feel about your hair? How do these impact how you see yourself? Fatigue. How has tiredness and your ability to rely on your body to perform certain actions changed? How does this change how you see yourself and feel about yourself? Pain. How do you make sense of the fact that you feel pain? What do you feel when you sit with the idea of admitting to others that you need help with pain? What does this mean about you? What does this mean about you that you're admitting you need help? Surgical body modifications or scars. What do scars or other effects of surgery make you feel about your body and yourself? Cognitive impairment or brain fog. Have tumors, radiation, chemotherapy, or medication had an effect on cognitive functioning? How has this changed how you see yourself? And sexual functioning. How does your ability to achieve and maintain an erection, sex drive, or the different levels of energy for sex change how you see yourself? So these physical appearance, fatigue, pain, surgical body modifications and scars, cognitive impairment, sexual functioning. These are just a few ways that that through our clinical work, Dominique and I have seen different men talk about how their body image has changed. But this isn't an exhaustive list. You might be thinking of another way that your self-image and body image have been impacted that's not on this list. But by asking yourself these types of questions, you can start getting into a more reflective perspective where you're able to think about specifically how has this changed and what was the cause of that change. And then the rest of the presentation, Dominique and I will be sharing specific ways of the what now. What can you do once you've gotten in touch with how you're feeling about this change? How can you work through that?
Okay, so let's talk about confidence. And so confidence, as we know, it's all about relativity. I think it's really about how you sort of see yourself as you stack up next to others. And what we know is that most things are subjective, whether that means how much your net worth is or how quickly you can run a marathon or what have you. While these may be extremely important to you, or maybe the folks who are in your peer circle or whatever, they may not be important at all to others. And so we know that the subjectivity is flawed. We also know that it's something that's quite unique, but it can be extremely oppressive. And so by being able to sort of take a step back, recognize that a lot of these are just social constructs, we can start to ground ourselves a little bit, give ourselves a bit more confidence in these moments where maybe we feel like we're not stacking up. And so when these moments, whether we're feeling better than we felt in years, or if we're feeling a little bit lower, we always want to start to look at what we're capable of, and then also what we're able to control. And so this phrase, locus of control, this refers to how external or internal factors are affecting us, and how much of them we can control. So for example, I can't necessarily control the weather, but what I can do is make sure I check the weather app and bring an umbrella, right? And I can be prepared. So being prepared in many cases is going to lead to that much more confidence, but also recognizing and being able to accept what's out of that range is also going to allow us to feel as though we're part of something greater. We have this sort of shared peer experience of being subjected to something out of our control, being subjected to something greater, or in this case, being subjected to the side effects or of post-treatment or treatment itself. Knowing that with chemo, maybe after 2 or 3 days, we don't have the same level of energy we usually do. Maybe we have a little bit more mental fog, but knowing that as a week passes, we may be more capable. And so that means sort of looking at, okay, maybe I'll make the more challenging tasks happen at the end of the week when I'm starting to feel myself, and allow those first several days to be maybe focused on more just relaxed or sedentary activities. Maybe that's catching up on a documentary or some podcasts, or just sitting around or calling folks, just sort of recognizing what level am I at and can I match it? And so also when we're dealing with challenges and setbacks, we always want to start to check in with our attitude, and how we feel about failures. And so I always personally like to see each failure as a lesson, but in many cases, sometimes those failures don't result in said lesson. If it's something that's maybe out of your control, let's say you got a bad scan and you have some poor results that you now need to share with family, and then also sort of deal with it on your own. And so how can we start to deal with that in those moments? All we can do is sort of check in with what's in our control once again. All we know is that we can refer to our treatment team. We can try to build or strengthen our connections with those around us, those who support us, and also maybe work on our nutrition, fitness, and so on. But knowing that certain things are out of our control, while it doesn't necessarily completely alleviate these symptoms, around confidence or around feeling ourselves or anxiety or so on, it will certainly diminish some of it, by taking away at least half of what we're dealing with, knowing that we are controlling what we can. And so we also want to make sure we're acknowledging when we do have successes. If we notice that we're feeling a little bit stronger, we need to acknowledge that by either showing some gratitude. Maybe we can journal that. Maybe we want to acknowledge how great a job our caregiver is doing. There's so many ways we can see success if we're open to it, but it can be often quite challenging when our head's down or we're not feeling as confident as we can. So once again, it becomes that much more important to see, okay, how can I sort of boost my confidence in these moments, knowing what I can control? And so what I think is very helpful is this acronym SMART. So it's 5 steps, and we're able to start moving towards a better self. So the S stands for specific. So we want to make sure we're setting realistic goals. Next, we want to make sure that goal is measurable. So that's the M. Meaning if I'm learning how to train for a marathon, I'm checking my split times. I'm sort of seeing, okay, what can I handle before my shins start to split? And so we're able to sort of see these and track the progression of our success as we're moving forward, or at least before we even start moving towards the goal, we want to make sure that we have some ways of denoting what that progress will look like. Next, we want to make sure that goal is attainable. Sort of like before, as I mentioned, I'll never be able to bench press a car, but I may be able to bench press 135 pounds if I set that as a goal, right? And maybe that's a goal for 3 weeks, maybe that's a goal for 6 months, but we want to make sure that that's something that I'm actually capable of. And I know this is a physical goal, but maybe the goal needs to be more around something simple or social. Maybe I want to talk to more friends this week. So I'm going to set that somewhere reasonable. Maybe that's just 1 friend per week, and then I'll maybe move that up. Okay. Next, I want to make sure the goal is relevant. So if I'm feeling as though I need more support, I'm feeling as though I'm lonely and experiencing just being stuck, I may want to see, okay, I need to start doing a little bit more outreach. I need to maybe go do the things that make me feel happy, connect with more folks. So once again, I'll be making that 1 phone call a week or maybe even a day. And next and last, we want to make sure it's time specific. I want to set this goal within a reasonable time frame. I don't want to set one that's just sort of loose, like I'm training for a marathon. I don't know when the marathon is, but I'll do it eventually when I'm done with my training. We want to set that date so that we know we're holding ourselves to something. Sometimes it's helpful to have someone else who's pushing us along, or a coach or a peer or someone to support us. But it's so important that we set some sort of timeline for ourselves, or else it starts to just fade into nothing and yet another goal that doesn't get accomplished, which of course isn't going to boost our confidence. And then lastly, we want to make sure we're sort of embodying our best self. And so one of the ways we can do this is by highlighting our strengths. And so if I know that maybe I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I have a hunger for knowledge or something like that, I'm going to go ahead and think about these as I move into any sort of social space. Let's say I have social anxiety. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm curious in nature. So maybe that means I'll lean on asking more questions, finding out more, being empathetic, rather than trying to sort of put myself out there as, like top dog who really just wants to dominate everyone around him, right? And so by playing and shifting roles, knowing that we're capable of multiple ones, knowing that we can compartmentalize and be different forms of ourselves or versions of ourselves, depending on the scenario, we can then start to address things differently, knowing we're not stuck, knowing we don't have that fixed mindset, and being able to set these goals that are possible and attainable for us. All right, next slide.
So I want to talk about frustration and the themes that could contribute to frustration. So frustration could show up at any point in the timeline, from diagnosis throughout treatments. So at diagnosis, you could feel extremely frustrated that you're losing some sense of control over your body or your physical health. You could be frustrated at treatment options. You could be frustrated at how you're responding to treatment, or what effects the treatment's having on you. You could be frustrated with your friends or family or your caregivers. So you could be frustrated at many things at any given time. And so some of the things that touch on the idea of frustration. First, I want to talk about shame. So as I said earlier, shame is the emotion that you feel when you have a response of "I am a bad person." And so, for example, if you feel like control is a big part of masculinity, and you feel like out of control, then you could feel like you're a bad person. You're bad at being masculine. And perhaps that is just one way of interpreting it. And shame could lead us to withdrawal. So if you think that you're a bad person, you're gonna think that you're not worthy of interacting with others, or of socializing or getting the support that you need. Inactivity can be seen with shame as well. Shame leads to an increased sugar and fat intake. So much like stress, shame leads to an increase in cortisol, which makes you want to, if you have an option of cooking anything, you're going to want to cook things that's high in sugar and high in fat. And because of this physiological stress response of that additional cortisol, that this will lead to an increase of inflammation, decreased immunity, and poor overall health. Another theme that has to do with frustration is motivation. So much like what Dom was talking about of internal and external locus of control, for motivation, there's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic comes from within and extrinsic comes from outside. And so for research shows that intrinsic motivation leads to the best outcomes and is most effective. So if you think about someone that wants to work out more or go to the gym more, the person that's going there for reasons that belong to them, that come from within, will stick to it for a longer period of time and will have better results than someone that goes to the gym for reasons outside of themselves. So for example, someone that works out and wants to get fit again, or more fit, because for their health, for their mental health, so physical or mental health, or for any other personal reason, will have better results than someone that goes because they want to, look better for someone else, because someone else wants you to be there. So that's just an example. And so with motivation, speaking to a therapist or getting group support, and even talking about poor or low motivation with your doctor can be helpful. Reworking extrinsic motivations into intrinsic ones can be helpful as well. So for example, if you first start doing something because someone else told you should do something, or that you have to do something, talking this out with people in similar positions, such as in a support group or with a therapist, or even with other people that you trust and feel comfortable talking to, reframing an extrinsic motivation as an intrinsic one will lead to better results as well. But overall, whether you're feeling frustration, shame, or just low motivation, I just wanted to point out that your worth. You are worthy of happiness no matter what you're feeling at any given time. And it might not feel like it in that moment, but there are actionable steps that you can take to get to that point. But at no point do you not deserve to get what you're setting out to achieve.
All right, patience. So I'm just going to go through these. So I think with patients already, the cancer process demands so much of anyone, both within the patient themselves and the family, everyone around. And so it's already challenging. Honestly, I cringe every time I hear the word patience. And maybe that's from my youth or something, but either way, I think it's easier said than done, but it is something that we can certainly work on and towards. It's actually quite a malleable trait that often seems as though it's something that people are either born with or they just can't possess at all. And once again, if we're able to embody that growth mindset, we will know that if it's something we put the time into, we'll be able to reap the rewards. And so the first thing we always have to talk about with any practice is persistence. Knowing that anything we're pursuing, whether that means like regaining our strength or growing of our hair, whatever that is, we know that as we continue to make our repeated efforts through practice, we may be able to make some steps towards that idealized goal. Now, this isn't going to be universal. Certain things are irreversible, of course, but certainly do believe that if we can add certain methods to our practice of patients, we'll be able to at least produce some results within that category. And so one of my favorite ways of going about this is through mindfulness. Mindfulness being sort of taking in any moments, being able to sort of slow yourself down, staying present, and opening yourself up to more sensory experiences as opposed to the entirely emotional or cognitive experience. So this sort of meaning, if I stub my toe, does it mean I go and punch the wall immediately, or do I allow that thought or the experience? I sort of sit with it and say, okay, my toe is hurting. It's making me upset. I'm angry now, but I have options, right? And so in one case, it's going to be much more destructive. The other case, we actually have some more options. And what I love about mindfulness is really opens us up to creativity. And my favorite way of just like being able to invoke it is just by sort of thinking about it through the metaphor of using the beginner's mind, trying to sort of see any situation as though maybe we haven't seen it before. We possess all of the knowledge we previously possessed, but we're heading into that situation fresh, new, and without maybe all of the sort of like bitterness or vinegar that we may be holding on to due to prior experiences. And so next is flexibility, knowing that any sort of situation can change. And because of that, we already know that we're going to have some patience. So for folks who've had kids, often they don't do what we expect them to do. And there's no greater test, I think, than raising children beyond maybe, some other things in life. But as we start to note what it takes within those moments, and as we start to see like what options do we have when we do feel impatient, does that mean I need to go find something else to do in that moment? I'm not watching the kettle boil. I'm just sort of like maybe finding other ways of using my mind or distracting myself, doing what needs to be done. And next is trade-offs. We always want to sort of see doing like a sort of cost benefit analysis of what am I sort of getting within any moments? What have I gotten out of this? I think this is a lot more hard to tackle within the cancer diagnosis because often I feel like folks tell you, oh, you need to be more positive. You got to look at things on the bright side. And what I more lean towards is looking for peace. We don't always want to necessarily look for just like positive feelings because often the inverse of that may be down, angry, sad, all of these other things. But if we're able to sort of find balance, not necessarily expecting to have like the laughter, the joy, all of these sort of things that we may see other folks who haven't had this diagnosis having, we're not necessarily going to be quite satisfied. So if we can move towards peace and we can find peace through that patience, then we'll be able to sort of feel a little bit better. But just as far as it goes with trade-offs, if I am starting to notice that maybe I have gained a different lease on life, or maybe I'm noticing that I appreciate certain moments that may have been frustrating before due to a new view, that's just one form of looking at a trade-off. And we always have the option of looking at things optimistically, or at least seeing what was gained, because it's always glaringly clear what was lost in many of the situations that require the patience or require this of us. And next, we always want to recognize growth. We always want to recognize where we've been able to sort of adapt, what we've overcome, looking back down the mountain, seeing that we're at the peak, or noticing that we have more to go, but seeing what have we left in our wake, and was it positive? Was it negative? How can we sort of adapt and change, modify the system that we're working within, and then do so in a way that's going to be kind and caring and compassionate to those around us, but particularly ourselves. And next, we always want to acknowledge our limitations, whether this is before your cancer diagnosis or after, just sort of seeing and checking in, once again, with that actual self. What can I do in this moment? Do I have the strength that I once possessed? Maybe I just need to be more creative and find other ways, or maybe I just need to find support. But once we acknowledge that limitation, it no longer becomes the same sort of point of stress. While it will maybe inevitably lead to some degree of anxiety, we know that we can start to minimize that just by sort of knowing, okay, I already knew I couldn't lift this vehicle. Let me go ahead and get the lift so out of the back of the car because I know what my limitations are here, right? And next, relaxation techniques. I'm quite fond of the 4-4-4 technique, which is a breathing technique where you inhale for 4, hold for 4, and then exhale for 4. It's used by Navy SEALs, and not to endorse anything military-wise, but I do think that if they're using it, it must be effective for field combat. And so the 4-4-4 technique is excellent. There are also body scans. You can do progressive muscle relaxation, which is really just sort of going through your body, sort of sensing each sort of muscle group, starting either at your toes or the top of your head. If you're starting with your toes, basically you're flexing each muscle group and then you're relaxing it. This both allows us to sort of recognize where we hold on to stress, but it also allows us to start to relax our entire body. Not only is this good for relaxation and patience, it's also great for falling asleep if you're having trouble with insomnia. And so that would sort of look like for my eyebrows, I'll do a little show for you. So I'll probably have my eyes closed. I'm breathing slowly, I'm relaxed. And so I'll bring my eyebrows all the way up for a couple seconds, and then I'll relax them. And then I'll furrow my brow for a couple seconds, and then I'll let that relax as well. Then I may go down to my eyes, squinting as hard as possible, then relaxing, and so on, going down through each muscle group down to my toes. And then lastly, graduated exposure. So this is a technique that's often used with folks who do have phobias or fears, and it really refers to sort of like slowly dipping a toe in as you re-engage with whatever the stimuli was that was causing the fear response. And so in this case, this may be socializing, this may be going back to work, whatever it is. How do we start to create a regimen or a routine that's going to work for us, knowing our unique point of view, knowing our unique needs, and how do we, once again, sort of just check in with ourselves realistically and say, okay, I'm going to take this one step at a time, right? Okay, and that's the end of that slide.
So I want to talk a bit about redefining masculinity, and I think to add to redefining, harnessing, it could be another addition to that, and it really depends on the specific thing and the specific person and whatever you're contemplating. So the idea is to lean into the different quote unquote masculine qualities and traits to see what serves you at different points of your day-to-day life. So for example, the fixer or problem solver, this is known to stereotypically be a masculine trait. And so like Dom said, there are times where you want to resist the urge to go into the fix it mode, but there are times where if you're feeling hopeless or helpless, more specifically, in a certain situation, then harnessing the idea of being the fixer or problem solver can help empower you to take action in that moment. Another is for control. So if again you're feeling helpless or hopeless in a specific situation, harnessing that idea of taking control of your situation can help empower you to take action on it as well. Humor is another one. Many people find levity in their ability to enact humor in different situations. Attitude, fighting mentality. These are both traits that having an attitude that of a fighting mentality, for example, helps frame the challenges and the hurdles that you face in your day-to-day lives. So there's also this idea of the king. So the king is wise, graceful. The king is patient, stoic, self-aware. He's a mentor, and he's surrounded by allies. So if this is something that you feel helps empower you, then this is something that you can harness in whenever you need it, whenever you're feeling less than a king, or you don't have a fighting mentality, or you're feeling helpless in a certain situation. All of these qualities are things that you could enact at any given time. But also, the redefining part of it is you can create your own. So these are just a couple ideas of, traditionally masculine traits or thought of to be masculine traits. But depending on your definition of masculinity, you can create your own and then harness it whenever you need that support. You can also find like-minded peers that have these qualities. So let's say humor, you're not naturally, let's say, gifted at humor, or you find that it's difficult to enact humor on your own. Finding someone that is, a humorous or a funny person, and just talking with them, joking around with them, that could have similar effects as well.
Okay, so building resilience. So as we know, through the cancer process, resilience is always mentioned as a key feature, just as far as being able to survive through chemo, the life changes, especially during the quarantine of COVID-19, where many of us did not have the sort of support or resources that we're accustomed to. And so already we were faced with that sort of first phase of building resilience as we tried to adapt and tried to sort of recover, reclaim ourselves. For the introverts, it's quite easy. You're able to sort of like dive into yourself, re-engage with those activities, habits, or what have you that you maybe didn't have time for before. And for those of us who are more extroverted, this was probably much more challenging, knowing you couldn't see people face to face, be around folks, even when we were all, ridiculously buying patio torches and all sorts of stuff just so we could sit outside together. But we do what we can. Resilience takes many forms. And so I think like one of the ways we can build resilience is meaning making. So this means that any opportunity, any experience we have can be either a lesson or it can be just something for fun, but like, how do we categorize it? How do we define it? How do we operationally like want to sort of see how whatever it is that we're doing is functioning within our lifespan? And so whether that means this cancer taught me how to value life, or this cancer taught me that I don't trust doctors, whatever it is, how do I then want to sort of take that meaning and move forward? Next is personality traits. We always want to be, once again, honest with ourselves on who we are. If I'm introverted and I know that it's very challenging for me to connect with others, but I'm finding myself isolated, how do I sort of lean into what other qualities I have outside of this introversion in order to sort of benefit myself? So if that means I don't want to see people in person, maybe a phone call is better. If a phone call is too much, maybe we can text. If texting is too much, maybe we'll just send funny pictures to each other, right? And so once again, we're sort of just like looking at ourselves honestly and openly and saying, okay, this is me. I accept myself where I am. And I can be resilient in that way because no longer am I sort of being threatened. I'm finding new ways to be creative. And that, of course, is going to be a form of strength. Next is social support, as mentioned before by Mark. I think it's just so critical, whether it's family or a support group here at the Cancer Wellness Center, just having and experiencing empathy really does make the difference. And I was reading a book called The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama, and they were just sort of talking about how community is so significant in being able to find yourself, and being able to relate to others, and in being able to have some form of strength, knowing that you're not alone, you're not just an island, and that you can sort of walk on the shoulders of giants as necessary while being a giant yourself, right? And so please don't be afraid to reach out to that friend you haven't talked to. It might even be someone that, you never even want to socialize with, but they may be a good ear for you to lean on when the time is right. Next, we always want to sort of look at hope and optimism, but we want to do so realistically. And I always see, and I told this to Mark before in a previous meeting, I think that hope is really where we're able to start to recognize like what's around us, what's possible, and then be able to set realistic parameters for how we engage with the future, knowing what we're capable of in the present. And while I think it's great to be optimistic, many of us who were optimistic had poor scans, still had as much faith in the world. Maybe you were praying, maybe you were rubbing crystals together, but that optimism didn't result in the result in I guess like the outcome that would have been as optimal as you would have liked. And so, does that mean that we completely dismantle hope, or does that mean that we start to reconfigure it and start to see, okay, where do I place my hope? Do I want to place my hope on, I don't know, the Cubs winning a game versus the store having the right milk, the oat milk that I like, being able to set once again like these realistic parameters, but also knowing that just because we were optimistic and just because we did have hope in a situation that didn't work out for us does not mean that there won't be hope for us in the future. I think it's really easy for us to feel completely downtrodden or just decimated and run over by life. But often when we do have those social supports, or we have sort of like some sort of peer network where we're able to have relative experiences, once again, I think relativity is so helpful, and how we're able to sort of like see and perceive. Once again, we may feel reinstilled with that hope. And then distractions. I think this is a fun one just because, like, we all have these smartphones, or we have TV shows, we have books. Sometimes we just need to recover and tuck ourselves away underneath a nice book, knowing that we're just sort of building up our reserves for a world that is often challenging. And so being able to do so, and that recognizing those moments where, wow, I've exhausted my reserves, my emotional reserves just aren't present. I can't necessarily go out and be this social person that maybe I once was, or that maybe I'm idealizing myself as. And so maybe I just need to take a moment, step back, once again, recognizing my personality traits and sort of leaning into them. And lastly, post-traumatic growth. As we know, the cancer journey is quite traumatic, regardless of what stage you were diagnosed with. And so it leads to, not only is it necessary to have some sort of treatment, whether that's counseling or just something you do for yourself, but I think it's so important to sort of acknowledge what is lost. And I think there is certainly some degree of grief that's inherent to the cancer process. And so one model that's particularly helpful for men in dealing with grief is the dual process model of grief. And so this sort of looks at the two types of stressors that or orientations that we can have and experience throughout the grieving process. And so those two are loss oriented and restoration oriented. And so loss orientation, this is focusing on the emotional processing that we do of the loss of the person we once were. And so maybe this means more of the, maybe we're crying about it, maybe we're speaking to others, maybe we're just sort of like staring at a lake, like whatever it is, we're having these low points. But it's so important to have these low points because of the processing that happens there. And we're able to sort of grow, learn, reflect. And so it's entirely necessary, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, oh, I'm going to go and talk about it for 5 hours over coffee and then feel better. Because let's be honest, for a lot of men, that's not what's going to be natural. And so we always, once again, want to lean into components that are true to ourselves. And next is the restoration orientation, which is more about the demands of what we have lost, or living after recognizing what has been lost. So these may be the sort of responsibilities that we once had, or claiming responsibilities if you're a caregiver, and sort of recognizing, okay, I can't do the things I once did, but I am starting to learn some new skills around how to be a person that's functioning, how to be that person maybe I once was. Maybe I don't have the same amount of use in one hand, but I'm finding tools, programs, and what have you that are allowing me to sort of supplement my abilities. So we're sort of learning and restoring. And so between these two, we're always oscillating. But what's most important is the oscillation within each state. And so we don't always need to be dealing with those emotions head on, right? We don't always have to face those emotions. We don't always have to face doing those tasks, those restorative tasks, right? And so sometimes we may notice, okay, I'm avoiding it. I'm going to go watch a movie. I'm going to go hang out with the guys. I'm going to go do like whatever it may be. But making sure that there is oscillation, that we are going between the two and allowing ourselves to sort of experience the grief of what was lost so that it doesn't come back to bite us eventually, and so that we can actually have dealt with it, accepted it, and we can then move on to becoming that version of ourselves that we'd like to be.
So
Yeah.
continuing the discussion of post-traumatic growth, we wanted to show you this diagram, and it shows how cancer can lead to this post-traumatic growth through several processes. So as Dom explained, post-traumatic growth, or PTG, as you see in the diagram, is the subjective positive psychological changes that arise when someone endures some major life crisis or traumatic event, such as a cancer diagnosis and everything that that entails. So what's interesting about this diagram is that interpreting the diagram, when you're doing so, you can start anywhere. So, for example, an individual's capacity to make sense of their diagnosis leads them to an increased capacity to find benefit in their experience, whatever that might look like, which leads to the redefinition of self. Another sequence is ruminating and optimism. Can lessen suffering, which in turn increases rumination, which adds to the individual's capacity to find benefit, and so on and so forth. And so then all of this leads to post-traumatic growth. And some examples of this are appreciation of life, personal strength, relating to others, new possibilities, spiritual well-being, health behavior change, or feeling of control. So just an example of a change of more specifically, let me find the square, the individual's capacity to find benefit. So Dominique and I have worked with the men's group for quite some time together. And, one example that we've heard is a takeaway to find a benefit is a participant got to spend more time with his kids. And initially, when you ask, what benefits has your cancer diagnosis brought to you, most people can completely are in shock. They can scoff that off and say, "What are you talking about benefits? This is nothing but losses, nothing but pain. I can't think of any benefits." But part of this process, as you can see in the diagram, which can lead to post-traumatic growth, is really digging to find those benefits. So, for example, this participant that spent more time with his kids, that led to a redefinition of self, that the value of spending quality family time together is really important to him. And this led to the post-traumatic growth of both appreciation of life, spending time with your loved ones, new possibilities, future memories that can be made with his kids. And then also a feeling of control of I can spend my time how I want to spend my time. So that is just one idea. And again, when you look at this, whether you're watching it right now on the YouTube video, feel free to pause it, or for those attending live, we'll be sending out the YouTube video. So take a look at this, see what sticks out to you, where you might be in this diagram right now, and try to follow it. And hopefully this gives some perspective of what could eventually lead to post-traumatic growth.
Okay, support. So, as mentioned earlier, it's so critical and important to receive support, whether that's from your friends or whether that's from a professional. We already sort of seen how important it is to communicate with your treatment team. And then outside of that, we do need the emotional support that's going to allow us to continue to be as resilient and as positive or optimistic or hopeful or what have you, or peaceful, as I prefer, as possible for the future, right? And so first off, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of support do we need? Is it that we're lonely? Is it that we're feeling abandoned? Maybe it's just that we don't have the coping skills that we may need to sort of slow things down or to just reassess. And so being able to sort of do that first, as sort of like self-reflection, once again, whether that's to sort of look at, okay, what are my key attributes and how can those sort of play into supporting myself? And then also recognizing within the community, if that's maybe you need like spiritual support, or maybe you need a group of atheists or what have you, whatever's going to sort of match you and be best for you is going to be what's important. So it's when someone does come up to you and say, oh, have you talked to somebody, you know, especially since the whole point we're doing this here series is to make sure that men are being more active with mental health. Can't spell mental without men, but I mean, the health part's got he in it, whatever. But as we sort of like look at that and we look at how maybe we're going to start being either more progressive or just trying something new, once again, embodying that sort of growth mindset and being able to push forward and see, okay, I'm not necessarily certain what's going to happen. I've been doing things this way so long. It's not working right now, or maybe it is working and you don't need to change it. But if it isn't working, you're noticing maybe you're languishing more, maybe you're not feeling quite as happy or satisfied. Maybe it is time to go ahead and reach out. And so this word interdependence, so this is more to do with like family units, whether that's you and your spouse, or you and your kids, or you and maybe a significant other who's just a friend or a roommate even. Really, it's sort of checking in with how are you able to sort of exist separately from them while also coexisting in a sense. So what this means is I have my own sort of personal life. I do my thing. We then come together. We watch movies. We eat. We talk. All that. But this whole time, I'm not necessarily quite as worried about, oh, what is she doing? And I'm curious. And like often when we lack interdependence, what this leads to is codependence, where you see these people who are sort of stuck at the hip and can't function without each other. And while that can be the result of the diagnosis, given how much reliance is sort of forced within your relationships, we do need to sort of strive or move back towards having our own existence, having that independence, and being able to be our own sole individual. And once again, recognizing what is it about me that I need for me that's not entirely contributing to this sort of like group or collective dynamic that's going to be feeding into me, allowing me to feel myself, thus adding to my confidence and thus allowing me to be my best self once again. And then mutual dependence. So this is kind of the opposite, sort of recognizing, okay, when do I need to start relying on others? And so as Mark mentioned earlier, as men, there's a societal expectation that we can kind of do it ourselves, right? Or we can all be the king, or we can all sort of just function and be this island. And you know, I've heard both sides of the fence, right? No man is an island, or everyone is their own sort of island, sort of scattered within the sea. But in some cases, we will need to rely on others, whether that's due to physical a lack of physical ability, or if that's due to us not remembering things and we just need someone to tell us when our appointment is, or what have you. Sort of recognizing and checking in once again, seeing, okay, what's necessary to make this operation as efficient as possible. And here at the center, we offer support groups. As mentioned before, we have a men's support group. We also have a caregiver support group. We have, amongst others, we have one-on-one counseling, 8 sessions, so you don't have to commit to anything too long. You can always just pull out whenever you need to if you find that it's not working for you, but it may be worth a shot at least once. We also offer couples counseling and family counseling if you want to come in with that partner or with someone so you can start to discuss these new dynamics that are emerging. And I also think as we're starting to look around and some of the other resources that do exist, whether that's Immerman's Angels, or maybe you want to mentor people, Immerman's Angels being a mentorship program. But we want to look at, okay, maybe I need a physical therapist, maybe I need someone who's going to be my trainer, maybe I need a nutritionist. There are just so many forms of support, and they're here, especially here at the CWC, where everything is free, which we love. So just don't hesitate to pick up that phone and give us a call, or give that friend a call, or whoever it may be, but make sure you're receiving the support that you need. And yeah.
So as Dom started to mention, mentorship can be a huge resource for men on their in their cancer journeys. Advocacy can be a large factor as well. So whether it be with family and friends, oftentimes, I'm sure I've worked with, and I'm sure Dominique has experienced this as well, with clients where their family and friends just have no idea what they're going through, specifically with treatments, with all the appointments, different tests and scans, and some part of educating others about what you're going through can help form that bridge between others that might not understand. And so that could help that form that bridge of support that a lot of people are lacking. And also cancer specific organizations, whether that be getting involved with Cancer Wellness Center, American Cancer Society. There are so many. A lot of people find empowerment in getting involved with this, with advocacy. And so when we talk about mentorship, there's both support, which is the receiving end of it, receiving support, and altruism, which is the giving part of it. And then comes the idea of role progression, where at first, when you're first diagnosed, very, very likely you'll be on the receiving end of that support. You'll get in touch with someone and they will be the ones offering you support. But through the cancer journey, as you progress through treatments and get more experienced in everything that a cancer diagnosis entails, your role can progress to the giving role, the altruism part. And so, as Don mentioned, the organization Immerman Angels, you can either receive a mentor or you can become a mentor. So for people that are newly diagnosed, you could be assigned a mentor, someone with either the same diagnosis or very similar diagnosis that's been in your shoes before, and there's someone that you can talk to so that you know what to expect, how things were for them, what helped, what didn't, and it's definitely a learning opportunity. And through that role progression, perhaps you can decide to be a mentor as well. And mentorship is both. It's both for yourself and for others. Which on the flip side, when it's for others, it can also be interpreted as it's for yourself. It's almost a win-win situation. So this is just another area that you could find and give support in.
And I'm going to go ahead and I just posted the link to their website if you are interested. It's immermanangels.org. It's one word, IMERMANANGELS.org. And they're pretty prompt. From what I've heard, they are phenomenal with matching folks with diagnosis-specific mentors and vice versa. And yeah. But yeah, that's the program for the most part. And we will be having a men's hike for health and happiness coming in August. It'll be that first week of August on a Wednesday. You'll see our smiling faces there. And we did one earlier in the summer. It was fantastic. So if you can, please come out. Now, this hike is only for men. So sorry if you're not able to join us, but please send your man if you can. And we will be having other programs that will be coming up. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, you'll be receiving those news within the next month, probably in our August newsletter. So look out for that. And there will be plenty to come, ranging from sexual health to virility and so on. So yeah, just look out for that. And yeah.
So I'll stop the share now, and we'll be ending the recording for those that are watching online. So if you're watching online, thank you for joining us. You could always reach out to the center, to either Dominique or I, for any questions that you might have, or for any referrals for any of the services that we have here. So thank you for watching. And the reason we stopped the recording is so that for the Q&A, if anyone attending live has questions, just to protect for your anonymity, we stopped the recording so it can be more confidential. But Dominique and I will hang around here for anyone that has questions. I believe you are all muted. So you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question, or feel free to put it in the chat. Yeah, that's the program. If we'll be around if you have any questions.
All right, we got a question here. So does CWC have age restrictions like 18 to 39 only? No, we see folks of all ages, children included, up to, I had a client who was 91. So we will see you and greet you with an age appropriate handshake.
And we not only have a child life specialist, but we also have a child therapist as well, who is relatively new to the center. So the difference there is child life specialists help to, do a lot of the explaining, help either coach parents on how to explain to their kids what's happening, either with their child's diagnosis or with their own diagnosis at an age appropriate level. Whereas a child therapist can meet for longer term and do some more of that psychotherapeutic work with the kids.
Everything we do is free.
Yeah.
We're a grant-based nonprofit, and we're fortunate enough to be able to provide everything free. With our counseling services for individual couples and family, those are always going to be eight sessions total, each of which running approximately 50 minutes. That's 50, between 45 minutes and an hour. And you're welcome to sort of schedule them as you'd like. But yes, everything is free. It's fantastic.
And support groups, there's no maximum number of sessions. If you join a support group, in one of the groups I facilitate, someone's been there 9-10 years, and those can meet as frequently as once a week to every other week, or any variation of that. And so that's unlimited as well. Jeffrey, also we have other services besides counseling as well. We have a kitchen, a large test kitchen. It looks like one of those TV studio sets for a cooking show, with Lori, who is a dietitian, and she does various programs, various classes on whether it's weight loss for wellness, or just general cooking and eating tips for healthier eating, and that's one of the services. We have yoga classes, lots of other educational programs, much like this one, and everything is free of charge.
Bye, Peter. Thanks for coming.
And you could also schedule up to 8 sessions one-on-one with Lori for dietitian consultation. So if you're having issues, let's say with nausea or constipation during chemotherapy, you can meet with her to discuss how to best alter your diet, or how to foods you should avoid or have more of, or portions, any combination thereof. So that's another valuable resource, also free of charge.
Well, Jeffrey, if you have any more questions, feel free to email either of us. I'm gonna go ahead and put my email in here. Perfect. Yes. Okay. So with that, the diagnosis needs to be within the last 5 years, or at least the last time you received treatment actually needs to be within the last 5 years. So if it's beyond that, I believe you can still attend all of our virtual programming, but in person you would not be able to, unfortunately. But yeah, I think yeah, Lori is phenomenal just as far as nutrition. She's like a wizard. Everyone I've ever heard of who's interacted with her left.
She's a fan favorite.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've left either stronger, thinner, whatever weight they desired, they found it through her. And the weight loss for wellness program is also pretty phenomenal. So there's certainly multiple routes towards taking control of your nutrition. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Well, still, yeah, come check us out. We have tons and tons of virtual programs. You can always check our website. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for that'll update you with any events that are going on. But I believe the men's hike is open. So if you'd like to join us there, feel free. We'd love to see you.
Yeah, and most classes, that even the in-person cooking classes, let's say, those are frequently recorded and posted on our YouTube channel as well. And so even if you can't attend right now, all past classes are uploaded there if you want to take a look at that.
Well, thanks for coming, Jeffrey. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Oh, yeah. He had another question for you, Mark.
Oh yeah. Repeat the last thing you offered. Yeah. Many of our classes, even some of the in-person classes, if it's yoga or some of the cooking classes, are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. So if you can get to the channel through our website, or if you're on YouTube, just type in Cancer Wellness Center, and there are entire playlists of past mindfulness classes, stress reduction classes, cooking classes, yoga, lots of things offered there. So you can look through years and years of classes there.
All right. Excellent.